Hi, I'm Adam Shepherd.
And I'm Jane McCallion.
Welcome to the ITPro Podcast, your weekly guide to the most important topics in the IT industry.
Now, this week, once again, the monthly ITPro 2020 is out this afternoon, in fact, if you are listening on Friday.
That's right, the focus this month is on startups. We've got some really good exclusive features, as ever, including how to build the best tech stack for your small business, why new businesses will lead the way in the new normal, and why now is as good a time as any to start a new business. Later on in the show, we'll be talking about how to use data to keep your business afloat during these turbulent times with special guest Libby Duane, co-founder and CCO of Alteryx. But first, let's talk about this week's top news stories.
First up, some of the biggest names in tech are facing a grilling in Congress over antitrust concerns. All the biggest names that you would expect, Jeff Bezos, Tim Cook, Mark Zuckerberg, Sundar Pichai, are all speaking in front of the House Judiciary Committee's antitrust panel.
This is related to claims that these companies' use of data and technology has negatively impacted both their consumers and the competitive landscapes in which they operate.
And, they're no stranger to this kind of investigation or accusation. The GAFA, as they are sometimes known, which is Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, are seemingly perpetually under investigation in the European Union in particular for anti-competitive practices or privacy problems or both.
This was a very interesting hearing to witness, not least because, due to the pandemic, it was conducted over Zoom. So you had a particularly amusing moment where Jeff Bezos was on mute for several seconds before he remembered to unmute himself, showing that even the biggest tech giants among us aren't immune from the occasional video conferencing whoopsie.
Yeah. Is this thing on? Yeah.
Aside from technical gaffes, though, there were some really tough questions asked of the collective CEOs. In particular, there were questions over Facebook's acquisition of Instagram and whether or not it effectively amounted to Facebook neutralizing their competition, which was a phrase that came up in internal emails around the time of the acquisition of Instagram by Facebook.
Oh.
Yeah, which is not the best look, shall we say?
No. Nice to have that thrown back in your face as well.
There were also questions as to whether or not Amazon analysed data from the third-party sellers that operate on its marketplace in order to develop their own products and effectively undercut those third-party sellers on price and availability.
Yeah, and, there are big questions to answer. I mean, with regard to the Facebook acquisition, like pretty much any time a Facebook acquisition comes up, and I'm just like, well, it's a bit late now, really, isn't it? You had a chance to scrutinise this. You either waved it through or didn't really look at it anyway. And now you're sat there kind of going, oh, actually, this might be a bit of a problem several years later. But yeah, I mean, whenever you get big companies like that, whether it's, now that we're in the kind of technology era or, previously in the industrial era, some companies will grow massive. And yeah, you have to really look at what they're doing because they will always seek to maximize shareholder value, if you like. This is what happens in a capitalist society, she said, sounding a little bit socialist, but it's true. This is what companies are built to do. This is their raison d'etre. And so if you don't want them to behave like that, you do need to do these kinds of inquiries, possibly a little bit sooner than, when it's too late.
This particular hearing is especially notable, though, because the subcommittee chair, Democrat David Cicilline, said that the committee would be publishing its report with more guidance, but he said specifically, which is quite rare, that the hearing has made one fact clear to me, quote, "These companies as they exist today have monopoly power. Some need to be broken up, all need to be properly regulated and held accountable." The accountability piece has been mentioned repeatedly before, but this is one of the most strident calls for the breaking up of these major tech companies from a government committee, which leads me to think that it might actually come to pass this time.
Hope springs eternal in your place. I mean, what I'd say as well is that from the point of view of two of them, it's quite easy to see how you would break them up. Facebook, you just break it up into its constituent parts that it acquired, fine. And Alphabet, similarly, you break it up into search and ads and blah, 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 blah. But with Apple and to a great extent Amazon, I mean, there's not much to break them into, if you get what I mean. It's not as obvious what you would do.
Well, I would disagree, because one of the biggest complaints levied at both of those companies is that they've been exploiting their position as the proprietors of a large and widely used digital marketplace to effectively operate on that marketplace with an advantage. So in Amazon's case, you would decouple the running of the Amazon marketplace from the manufacture and sale of any goods on that marketplace. You'd also probably separate it out from AWS, which there were also questions raised about. And in Apple's case, you would separate the App Store and iOS and Apple kind of hardware.
All other OSs and hardware,
from the App Store itself, thereby kind of lessening the possibility that Apple's going to give its own apps and services preferential treatment.
Also in this week's news, Intel's hardware chief has been ousted over the 7nm processor debacle that's been raging for the past couple of weeks. Venkata Renduchintala, also known as Murthy Renduchintala, who was the company's chief engineering officer and has been with the company for 4 years, will be leaving at the beginning of August, which by my count starts on Saturday.
That's right. This is the news that Intel has yet again pushed back the release of its 7nm processors, warning investors and customers that they won't be expected until 2021 or 2022 at the earliest.
Yeah. I mean, somebody was always going to have to take the fall for this, if you like, not necessarily calling him a fall guy, but somebody was going to have to be seen to take responsibility. Makes sense to make chief of that division.
Well,
speaking of divisions,
but the thing with this is he's been with the company for 4 years, and Intel has been pushing back the release of its 7nm chips for at least that long. I mean, 7nm chips have been, supposedly in the pipeline and, coming up to release for basically as long as I've been in tech journalism.
Yeah, but also, if you take that point of view, then perhaps he was brought on to try and stop this from happening. The problem continues, and therefore he hasn't fulfilled his role. It's worth also saying, the technology, systems architecture and client groups are going to be separated into separate teams effective immediately, which is, kind of the same as his resignation effectively, given it's, August on Saturday is also effectively immediate. So I don't know whether they are just trying a different tack, that rather than bringing in another person to oversee it, that if you just kind of restructure that business unit, if you like, or that part of the business, see if they can push it through like that. I mean, you tell me, you're more the hardware type person. Do you know what the problem is with the 7nm processor?
The problem with the 7nm processor as it currently stands is that the yields aren't high enough for each manufacturing run to make 7nm process manufacturing economically viable. But the problem with Intel's development more broadly is that it's lost its engineering focus. AMD has been on 7nm for a long time. They've had 7nm chips in market for at least a year, possibly even 2 at this point. They've been lapping Intel, frankly. And the reason AMD has been doing so well in recent years is because they put Dr. Lisa Su, who is, an engineer and a good one, in charge of the company. And they completely reorganized and restructured to put the focus back on R&D and on engineering rather than on the commercial side of the business. They, correctly, in my view, identified that if you get the technology right, the commercials will follow. And, so it has been proven. The Threadripper range is going great guns in the desktop workstation market and in the high-end enthusiast segment. The EPIC range of data center chips has been wildly successful and is making its way into more and more OEM products, not to mention the performance benefits that it's demonstrating. You can check out some of our reviews of EPIC powered servers for a demonstration of just how impressive it can be. The issue that Intel has is that it just doesn't have the R&D strength at the moment to deliver on the promises that it's making, and it's backed itself into a corner with the commercials to the point where it kind of has to deliver on those promises, because otherwise it's going to start losing a lot of customers.
Moving on, UK councils have been awarded £800,000 to build on digital services created during the pandemic. Now, this is not £800,000 each. It is split between 11 councils, and it's not an even split either. Some of them have got about 10% of that, others less than 10%. At least 2 of the projects, Newcastle Council and Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council, are to try and reduce overcrowding. And I think most of us have probably seen some of the pictures that come out of Bournemouth pretty much every time the sun breaks from behind a cloud at all. So I can see very much why, Bournemouth in the Dorset coastal area would want to perhaps try and stop that from happening over and over and over again.
Camden Council's one, to focus on something a bit closer to home for me, is about residents having more of a say on city centre redevelopment and planning on an electronic basis rather than having to write into the council or, attend meetings and that kind of stuff, which can be quite inaccessible for many people.
Well, also, in current times, you don't really want to be packing into a room full of, other people who might want to raise their voices or just generally be in quite close proximity. Typically when I've been a fairly kind of poorly ventilated room as well. So, it's really nice to see something positive coming out of COVID, building on the foundations of what's been put in place rapidly. I mean, that's kind of the story from a tech point of view of what's happened following COVID. It's just these, things have happened, like businesses have suddenly moved to remote working. Organisations have suddenly put out apps. There's the Zoe King's College, COVID tracking app. It's just suddenly gone like boom. And so it's really good to see that this is not just going to be, well, we threw some money at that, but now it's not a problem, so in the bin it goes kind of thing.
It is a modern truism that COVID-19 has done more to accelerate digital transformation in most companies and indeed public sector than any CIO or digital transformation program could ever hope to do.
We're going to take a quick break now, but when we return, we'll be speaking to our guest, Libby Duane, co-founder and CCO of Alteryx, about how to use data to keep your business afloat during turbulent economic times. Welcome back. That we're living in very turbulent social and economic times is no secret, and each day seems to bring more bad news. For businesses, the priority now is to keep their heads above water, but there's also opportunities to grow and to innovate. Here to talk to us about how data can help with this is Libby Duane, co-founder and CCO of Alteryx. Libby, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jane and Adam. It's great to be here today.
So before we dive into the meat of this topic, I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about yourself and about Alteryx.
Absolutely. Thanks very much. Alteryx is the leader in analytic process automation, or what we refer to as APA. And with our technology, our customers are unifying analytics, data science, and the automation of analytic processes into one end-to-end platform, really to accelerate their digital transformation. You gave examples just a few minutes ago of what Apple, Amazon, Facebook, and Google are doing. Those are just a few examples of companies that are leveraging data and those data assets that they create to be able to drive those digital transformations. And the other part of digital transformation is not just the data, but it's also us, the human. Human ingenuity is essential in creating any form of successful analytic automation. And we see it that when humans and machines work together as a means to amplify intelligence, we're able to solve amazing and remarkable problems globally.
So, Alteryx specializes in self-service analytics. Can you explain how this works and give us some examples of how it can benefit businesses over more traditional approaches to data and analytics?
Yeah, absolutely. Businesses today globally are looking for transformational outcomes. And with data analytics, the capabilities are fast growing and require a unified platform that makes analytics, data science, and process automation accessible to everyone, really turning every worker in a company into a data worker. And the traditional approach has many disconnected touch points, different tools, different software for diagnostic analytics versus predictive analytics versus data science, and certainly versus process automation. And those disconnected software created painful manual handoffs between those point solutions that often required specialized skill sets by each of the data workers and are causing data integrity issues that are slowing down those outcomes for the business. With analytic process automation platforms, we're displacing that patchwork approach to point solutions by bringing the user and the human intelligence back into that problem solving. And I can give you just a quick example from one of our clients, especially in this COVID time, of how that's changing. Brookson, based in the UK, is a digital financial services firm, and they're providing a variety of services, including payroll and accountancy to independent workers and freelance contractors. They were looking for a way to reduce manual analytic processes so that they could deliver higher value experiences to their customers with time saved. And so by being able to leverage the Alteryx analytic process automation platform, Brookson has advanced their use of analytic workflows to deliver automated tax accountancy and advice to their customers, as well as customized next best action for those customers. And what the analytic process automation with Alteryx has done for Brookson is not only is it helping them save tens of thousands of pounds, but it's also transformed how they work with their customers. They went from being 80% bookkeeping and 20% customer engagement to now they're 80% customer engagement and 20% bookkeeping company. And that's enabled them to elevate their internal team to become citizen data scientists who are delivering those high velocity digital transformations, not only for Brookson, but also for their clients.
It's interesting, Libby, to hear you talk about humans and machines working together, and that's something I'm increasingly hearing just kind of generally. Is this, I think that previously when we spoke about automation, both on the side of providers and kind of more widely in the industry, it was about kind of replacing squidgy humans and making things more technological and amazing like that. Whereas there does seem to be this kind of sympathetic approach now. What do you think's driving that?
A great question, Jane, because I think really what it is that for successful digital transformation, businesses are looking at what are the elements that they have to have, that they have to engage. And it really is, to our point, it's data, it's process, and it's people. But what's happened is now businesses are looking at this and they're saying, I need all three. Which one do I focus on first? And that's really where businesses are coming back and saying, I need to focus on all three because it's all three of those elements that are going to drive that success. And it's From a data perspective, that first priority is to make information accessible to everyone in the organization. The second is from a process perspective. Successful organizations are demonstrating what they're doing and how they're taking a technology first approach that is democratizing data analytics and data science, while also enabling optimization and automation of business processes. And that third element of people, businesses are saying we have to invest, we have to put money into reskilling and upskilling the workforce. That's requiring people to shift their focus from, making business decisions based on their gut or based on, this is the way we've always done it. Let's keep doing this way. It's gotten us this far. It's now being really focusing on getting the human focused on data delivery and developing those outcome focused mindsets.
And talking about disruption, and you phrased it already, COVID has caused business disruption globally, serious economic headwinds in the UK and to an extent EU. Brexit is expected to have a negative economic impact, even if that's just initially. So what is the most effective way for businesses to deploy analytics in order to deliver rapid value during these times and keep themselves going?
Yeah. Well, and as businesses are looking at how they're operating in these turbulent times, I think you touched on it in the opening, is that business leaders are saying, I can't wait anymore. I need to know. I need to function. I need to move the business forward faster. I'll give you a really quick example of when the power of people coming together. We all went through it globally as countries and cities were shutting down back in the February March timeframe. I had numerous conversations with people who said, my IT organization had us up and running virtually in a half a day, in a day, where they were telling me they were talking about those projects of going virtual, but it was always somewhere down the road. And when business leaders said, hey, teams, we have to do this now, getting Zoom up and running, getting Teams up and running, getting Skype, whatever your virtual collaboration technologies were, businesses moved very quickly. That same pace is happening around analytics in these times, and it's proving that when you bring data, process, and people together to think about how we solve, we all can move at a much faster rate. I'll give you a quick example of yet another client, Gymshark, based in the UK, is a fitness apparel and accessories manufacturer and online retailer. Their business problem was, how do we continue to drive online sales during this lockdown when people were not out and about, working out, going to the gyms? And so Gymshark understood that in order to survive in this new lockdown, they were seeing a slump in sales, and to turn that around, they needed to be able to monitor closely which products were performing well, and then be able to make those products more accessible to all shoppers via their website. And so using Alteryx, Gymshark was able to see what categories were performing well and which products within those categories were the leaders. Gymshark was also able to identify from their customer base who they were selling to. And these data then passed on to marketing and their sales teams to ensure that Gymshark could then tailor their products and services to complement those audiences. And for Gymshark, this has enabled them to remain agile during this turbulent time that we're all functioning in.
So when it comes to data and data analysis, and particularly companies making use of the existing data that they have within the business, are there any sources of data that organizations tend to overlook that might be put to profitable use?
The way we see it, Adam, is data is truly everywhere within a company. And so data sources for analytics are literally available in every single department and every single team within an organization. So when you think about a company, think about company cash flow, think about employee attendance records. If you're a manufacturer, think about where are the raw materials to make your products coming from. The list of those data sources is truly endless. But when you build and you cultivate a data-driven culture, your teams will find those data sources that are going to drive those better insights for decision making. And the other part of your question is not what data might be overlooked, but it might also be, are we thinking about how to get access to those data and be able to share those data across the organization? There's, of course, always going to be proprietary data that will only be shared for limited people to see, limited teams, et cetera. But it's that creative nature that the human being has to say, hey, what if we had data that showed us? And then the teams will start brainstorming and saying, I bet we have that data. And so we can't discount, to your question, data sources that are overlooked, and we can't discount the creative nature of teams when they're given the right approach, that right cultural fit, to think creatively, to say, let's get our hands on the right data.
So one thing I just quickly wanted to touch on, one of the common trends that we've seen recently is questions around data ethics and making sure that data is being used in a responsible way. How can companies make sure that they're baking that kind of ethical thinking into their organizations when they're moving to a more data-driven approach?
Great question. And the first point that I'll make on that is certainly data security. That has been part of my upbringing as being a data person, actually most of my career. And so that is the first part, is data security. And that is the responsibility of every organization to make sure that they are permissioning data to only those right people that should be able to see it and be able to get access to it. The second part of your question goes to, how do we enable our teams to be able to think creatively and to be able to think about what are the insights that we're trying to drive, what are the questions that are being asked. And so from a security perspective, it's making sure that as you're using those data and your permission to see those data, you're taking advantage of capabilities like what Alteryx can do, where you can anonymize data. And those are some of the requirements that we're seeing, and we talk to our customers about, and we talk about that with prospective customers, because that is a big question that our customers are thinking about. It's how they function. And that's where the analyst and the citizen data scientist role comes into play, to make sure that we are keeping that data secure in those right use cases.
So, Libby, what are your 3 top tips for extracting value from existing business data?
I love that question. What we see, Jane, is, first of all, you have to empower a culture of thinking with data that's going to lead to fact-based decision making. This starts at the top of every organization. No one is excused from thinking analytically, and you're the CEO, the CFO, the CCO, you're part of teams, you're leading those organizations. Everyone has to think analytically and ensure that you're having that culture that's enabling change, because analytics will drive change. The second is to enable your teams with technology to use data assets for analytics and data science. And the third, I think, is that investment I spoke about earlier. Invest in reskilling your teams for your own digital transformation journey. So often I'll be speaking with business leaders and they'll say that my team isn't skilled for analytics, when in fact the team is, and the team is ready to take on bigger analytics and tougher value questions. It's the technology and the data assets being accessible that are stopping those great analytic insights. And the teams need leaders to enable that learning, because the teams are hungry. They want to advance their skills. They want to show off their capability and their talent. And so I'll ask business leaders to invest in reskilling. We announced a new program back in early May called Advancing Data and Analytic Potential Together, or ADAPT. And so the ADAPT program is specifically designed to help anyone impacted during these COVID times who want to reskill or upskill around analytics. This gives them full access to be able to do that. So we're excited to make this available to all of your audience.
Well, unfortunately, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for in this week's show. Thank you once again, Libby, for joining us.
Thank you as well.
You can find links to all of the topics we've spoken about today in the show notes, and even more on our website, www.itpro.co.uk.
You can also follow us on Twitter at ITPro, as well as Facebook and LinkedIn.
Don't forget to subscribe to the ITPro podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever else you find podcasts to never miss an episode. And we'll be back next week with more news and analysis from the world of IT. Until then, goodbye.
Bye. The ITPro Podcast is brought to you by the Dennis Podcast Network.